Okay, good, gentlemen. So I think we left last year in a little bit of a mess, a tush, which we needed to mochek and hopefully come out with a clearer writing on top of it. To summarize, we had a shitter run, a miyuchas run that was medaik. The run doesn't give Maskama, good diuk in the Gemara. The Gemara says a kosev achas ois achas gedola, says the run that's mashma only if it's godol, which implies that the replacement has to be normal, benoni, but not super small. It has to be like with like. Don't really understand this. We saw a rosh that was masupuk, whether it's dafka mechikov and ois or even mechikov tishtush. She brought the tosefta that said even mechikov tishtush. That seems to be a strong raya that the melacha is preparing the paper for writing, but not the erasing of writing, because there is no writing that you erase. You erase tishtush, you didn't erase writing. We saw a Rambam who seems to imply both categories, perhaps. The Rambam begins that it has to be Mochek manas lichtov, taking the Mishnah at face value, that the melachot is Mochek manas lichtov. And then later he says it's enough that it's not Mochek lekalkel. As long as it's not Mochek lekalkel, that's enough. Implying that as long as you have any other positive reason for the mechika, that's sufficient. Implying that really the melachot is the mechika, the range of information, as long as it's positive, not negative. And the manas lichtov is just a means for it being positive, not negative.
But that's only the Rabbanan. He's only saying it's patur of alatzor in relation to.
Right, but he implies that if it's amanas lekalkel, it's patur of alasa. If it's not amanas lekalkel, then it's chayev. In other words, mochek, which is not mekalkel, is chayev. Any mochek which is mesakek is chayev.
He goes on to give examples in which it's in Yeshim Kumar Kedela. So
Correct.
Reading the whole sentence together.
Very unclear, yeah. So it's very unclear. He says that he seems to say that as long as it's not mekalkel, that's sufficient.
But what is not mekalkel? Not mekalkel is what he.
That's true, but that means that's just a means to it not being mekalkel. It's not the definition of the melacha. What we're trying to understand is the definition of the melacha mekalkel amanas lichtov, is the definition of melacha mechika, and as long as you have something positive that comes out of it, that's enough.
I just can't get the Shiur chatak out of this non-mekalkel when he's describing examples of where you are liable to the chatak of
He doesn't give examples at this point.
When we're moving on in that sentence.
I don't know, even though if there's a comma or full stop there, even though I printed in my Barilam edition. Yeah. It's a separate clause. I think it's a good diuk that a mochek that's not on manas lekalkel is chayev. That's what he says. The truth is, again, I'm not super stressed about the Rambam if you don't like it, but the Prima Godim, the Halacha brings from the Prima Godim, who says this is explicitly if you destroy an IOU, right? We saw that also you're chayev, which implies it's just a means to avoid the scenario of mekalkel. We saw the weaker rise. We saw the Ramah about eating a cake with writing on. I'm not fighting because I am a little unclear. I do think the diuk and the Rambam's a good diuk, but and we saw the Yerushalmi that even if you remove a spot, that's enough. There's no preparation of paper for writing there. You're just removing the spot and you're converting a dalad to a reish. That's called mechika of the dalad and writing of the reish. Very interesting. We saw the Gemara Gittin of Diol Gabi Sikra. Again, you're not really preparing any paper. The only erasure of the Sikra is because now there's Dio there, and nonetheless he says that's enough. So I'm in a terrible state of confusion at this point. So we need a Morin Avachim. The final thing I wanted to say was before I share my attempt at tidying this all up is that I began thinking if we left with I suppose a conclusion just based on the evidence that there's two dinim over here. There's two types of mochek. There's a mochek which is preparing paper, and that fits one family of halacha, for example, mechikas tishtush. And there's a mochek which is erasing information or writing, which is the other type of mechika, even if you're not going to prepare paper for writing. That's the Prima Godim, if there's another type of tikkun, like erasing an IOU, that's the Yerushalmi, that's Dial Gabi Sikra, that's Gemara Gittin. It's all a bit sossum. Again, if I'm right in the Rambam, then the Rambam's literally written both in one halacha without spelling this out. If I'm wrong in the Rambam, then okay, we avoid that in the Rambam, but there's still this problem. And then finally, I had another chiddush, which I think ties into this. The Brisa says, Kosav oisachas gedola, yesh min komen lichtov shtayim, part machat oisachas gedola, yesh min shtayim chayv. So if you're mochek oisachas gedola, even though you've only been mochek one ois, since there's a mokum lichtov shtay oisius, you're chayiv. Why? Surely it can't be more chashuv that mochek can't be more chashuv than kosev. The answer is no, because I'm preparing paper for the writing of two letters. Okay, that's if it's mochek category A. But what happens if it's mochek category B? Where the chashivas of the melacha is the deleting of letters. Well, I've only deleted one letter, not two letters. So does the brisa mean that if I'm doing mechika class A, I'm being mochek in order to write in its place, preparing paper, so I've prepared the grounds for two letters, so I'm chayiv for the mechika. But if I'm doing mechika class B, which is a ko'av or a tolda, we don't know exactly how the two relate, then I'm only chayiv if I'm making two letters, because if the etzem melacha, if the intrinsic fundamental melacha is deleting the letters, I've only deleted one letter, not two letters, so how can I be chayiv more? Now, this is a nice whopping chiddush for you, gentlemen, except it's very sossum in the Brisa, it's very hidden in the Gemara. I mean, no one spells this out. I'd like the Gemara, the Brisa to have said it, or the Gemara to point it out, or at least a Rishon to draw our attention to it, or maybe a Shulchan Aruch, or a Mishnah Berurah, or Shahatzian. Like, where are we waiting? It took till May 25 for Zobin to say this chiddush, that when the Brisa says that you're chayav for mechika, where there's mokum shtei oisius, that's only where you're doing class A mechika, where you're preparing paper. If you're doing class B mechika, surely the logic leads us to say that you would be potter, because, are you with me? I don't know why everyone's not getting excited by this. Everyone's off sleep. It's like, no, this is a beautiful chiddush. It makes perfect sense based on how we're learning, and yet it's ridiculous to suggest it because it's completely hidden in all the sources. Right? We're going to come in May 2025 with such a chiddush. I can't continue the show unless everyone's as frustrated as I am about this, and I'm not giving you the answer till I don't know. This is where I was literally tearing my hair out. Yeah.
It can't be more than Katiba.
Right.
Or it has to be at least two letters.
Yeah.
So even if it's Mochek, the actual important information, we still have to keep with the rules that has to be two letters.
Right, but the Brisa is not like you. The Brisa says even if you're making one letter,
it has to be space for two letters.
Correct. Why? Because you prepared paper for two letters. Fantastic. But what happens if it's this other mechika where the chashivas of the melacha is removing information? Logic would dictate that you've only removed one letter, so you need to delete two letters. Mochat oisachas gedola pata, even though there's space for 15 letters, because all I did was remove one letter. But I'm arguing with the price. I'm not in business of arguing Tanoim.
That's the whole finish. This is the only place where the mechika is stricter than the Ketiva. Also, in all other aspects, it has to be the same. So therefore, it has to be only space for two letters.
That's the Brisa. Beautifully said. But I'm asking you now a question. What happens if my mechika, I'm really just asking the question that was asked right at the beginning, is this almanas or not? What happens if the mechika was done because I wanted to get rid of the IOU? I have a note that I gave to you. It said IOU. I wrote 2000s instead of 200. So I'm mochek the naught.
Yeah.
I was mochek one letter. Paskin to me, Rafi, chayiv or potter?
Should make sense, chayiv, yeah, but
no, stop.
But the reason why you're potter.
No. I'm asking you yes or no. You mochek one naught, one letter. Chayiv or potter? Just answer me that. Sorry. Potter, why? Because you only was mochik one letter.
There's no space for two letters.
No, there's space for two letters. Very big letter. I wrote massive IOU 2000. Big O, big zero. There's space for two lovely size numbers. 1 second. Chayiv or Potter? Space for two letters.
Space for two letters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chayiv. Why are you saying chayiv? Because that's the price. Okay. Now I'm asking what's the logic? I created space for two, but the whole tikkun of the melacha was as per the Prima Godim, not in preparing paper for writing, but in the chashivas of the melacha was in deleting information. That's what I'm asking. That is my question. Yeah.
So I think Kativa is there to convey information. We said the minimum share of Kativa is 2 letters.
Yes.
If you remove 1 letter, you've not got Kativa anymore. You've done if you
No, you've got 1,000 letters. Not true.
Well,
But you have 1,000 letters.
It could be true.
Why?
Well, when you delete a 0 from your £2,000 IOU, you only owe £200. That's
But
pretty significant.
it's very significant.
So it is non-calco. It's removing information that is there.
So the prima
And it's and therefore sometimes you can be hired for only removing 1 letter because there may have only been 2 letters there.
No, but again, in this case, there weren't just 2 letters there. There were IOU, 2 things. There's 15 letters there, whatever it
It
is.
doesn't matter because that's the minimum share that can undo information. The minimum share that can convey information is 2 letters.
But you know what, Martin?
Sometimes-
I don't think you're right. But even if you're right, you're saying you're in Chiddush. Because the Brisa said the reason you're high for removing 1 letter is because there's space for 2. You're saying there's a different reason for removing 1 letter. It's an interesting ha'ara. We say that if the last letter of a book is high even for 1 letter, what happens if you're Mochek the last letter of a book? Would again the symmetry work? All interesting questions. I'm just a simple person. The Brisa says you're chayav for mechika of the letter because you created space 2. Really, the original question was asked right at the beginning: is this only where it's almanas? And we're asking what happens if the whole chashuv of the melacha isn't the creating space. The whole chashuv of the melacha is a different tikkun that I've removed an irresponsible debt note that I mistakenly gave out. Yeah.
One very simple one I'm going to say, so it's probably wrong, but could it be that, as he suggested, it's a completely separate, in a way, there are separate melachot, and your intention will determine when if you deleted something for preparation of the paper, you're going to be liable. If you didn't, you would still be asur from Ramadan, but it would be almost treat them as a separate melachot with separate intention.
The problem is that that's almost a summary of my question. We've come to this crazy world where, without anyone bothering spelling it out, there's 2 melachos of Mochek floating around. We call them Mochek A and Mochek B. They're functioning almost like 2 obvious melachos, which can be with some melachos. I'm a bit bothered non-spelled out. I'm not bothered that the Rambam didn't mention it. And when the Brisa says very clear words, it meant if you did Mochek A, you're chayav. If you did Mochek B, you're potter. It's logical, but it's near ridiculous. It's too sossum. It's too unmentioned.
Let's just say that in the world of code table 1 letter, I know, except for the finishing, it can never be higher.
Yeah.
In the world of Mochek in 1 letter, there is a scenario where you could be higher.
Yeah.
And because of that, we say a higher across the board, even in a situation where you're not actually going, it's only deletion of information.
It could be. It's just difficult to conceptualize what the logic behind that is. All I want to do is share with you that I think we've gone completely wrong here, and there are no 2 Mocheks, and I've spent the last weeks fighting the Gemara instead of listening to the Gemara, and we have to restart. And I came in with this Geschmack Chakira. It's quite well known Yeshiva Chakira, and I read the Gemara prejudiced with these 2 models, and I don't think we've conceptualized the Gemara correctly at all. I think we've gone wrong here, and I think the answer is, and I hope this explains basically everything, that there's one definition of kosef. Mochek. Mochek means fixing a mistake. That's what Mochek means, fixing a mistake. And the whole sugya is being mistovev around this nakuda of what we mean by fixing a mistake. So we'll start with the run. So what happened in the Mishkan? People made mistakes and they fixed the mistakes. That's what Rashi says. That was the story. That's what Mochek is. Mochek is fixing a mistake. The run comes into the sugyas, Medaik and the Losh and the Gemara, that there has to be some continuity or relationship between the original and the new for this to be deemed fixing a mistake. If I delete a letter or 2 letters, let's keep it with 2 letters just, or 1 letter, and I put in the place 2 completely separate letters of a different font, different nature, different style, there isn't a relationship between the 2. There isn't a sufficient relationship. I haven't fixed a mistake. I've just done something new. I've been kosef, because once it's blank, obviously, if I write 2 more letters there, then that's kosef. But my act isn't an act of fixing. It doesn't carry within it, and that's my relationship. For me to argue that in my act of deleting 1 letter, inherent in that is a fixing of 2 letters, there has to be some continuity there. Or let me put this differently. We have a brisa. The brisa seems to just be playing a clever game. The brisa says, Rabbi Menachem and Rabbi Yossi spells this out, that there's a type of chayma in Mochek more than kosef. Really? It's clever. But it really turns out it's just an optical illusion. Because if the essence of Mochek, let's say, is preparing space, I've really prepared space for two letters. So Kosef and Mochek are identical, really. It just happens to be that with Kosef you have to write two, with Mochek you have to clear the space of two, and you do that by clearing one. No. The Brisa is saying that Mochek is a melachot that has to be done in two oisius, just like Kosef is a melachot that has to be done in two oisius. Where are the two oisius of Mochek? In the virtual oisius that don't yet exist. In the fixing, how many letters worth am I fixing? The answer is if there's space for two letters, I'm fixing two letters worth of oisius. I'm doing that by deleting one letter, but I'm fixing two letters worth of oisius. Says the Ran, only if this is a fixing of two letters. In other words, there's a continuity in this. If this is a completely new letter, and there's no relationship between that, I've got rid of one letter, and then I'm doing a completely new act of writing two things between the two. There's no link between the two. I want to give you a mashal from other melachos that we learned, and there's a bit of chazara here. We were after the Mishnah, we learned a melacha of matir and kosher and matir, which is another symmetrical melacha, and we saw that matir is undoing al-manas liksha in order to recreate the knot. Not so interesting things. If I undo a knot and then I retie it, am I recreating the same old knot or a new knot? It's a bit of a sort of philosophical question. It's a bit hard to grab hold of. I'm not sure it makes any sense because knots don't really carry information the same way as letters do. But interestingly, we have to shine a halacha and a meiser about this. I have two strings which are knotted together. What happens if I'm matir? We actually asked this when we learned the sukkah. What happens if I undo one knot? I undo the knot in order to bring a new string there to attach, not to reattach the old strings, which is what the Gemara is talking about, where something nothing but done and so on and anything. But I want to bring a new string there. So we want to discuss this is called Koshel Manas Matal Manas Nikshar, because half the string is the same, but the other side is a different string. Is this recreating the same thing? The Gemara, again, I'm not comparing melachos to melachos, but the Gemara sort of plays with this idea with Soisal Manas Livnos. Does it Soisal Manas Livnos been Koma or not? In other words, is it Dafko Am Soisa to rebuild the same building, as it were, Bimkoma, or even in a different makom? I don't want to get too caught up. We're struggling enough to learn one melacha. I'm not trying to learn three melachas. I'm just using this to open our minds to this sort of conversation. That the Ran, it seems to me, the Ran is coming from a place where he's understanding Mochek as a repairing halacha, a fixing halacha. If you're repairing or fixing, we've resolved we're beginning to understand where the Ran is coming from, in which if there's a radical departure with what was, the Ran is bothered by this. So there has to be some form of continuity for this to be deemed repairing. I think the Rosh is now coming from the same place. I think the Rosh is now coming from the same place. The Rosh initially thought that if I remove Tishtush, that's not repairing. I'm removing Tishtush, that's clearing mess off paper in order to be able to write. The Malach of Mochek has to be Dumya de Mishkan. I don't mean Dumya de Mishkan just in a silly way. We said it's not enough to answer Dumya de Mishkan. It has to be like the Mishkan. There has to be some logic to it. You can't say just like the Mishkan was 3,500 years ago, therefore only if you do a Malacha 3,500 years ago it's a Malacha, or just like the Mishkan was in the Mitzvah only if you do a Malacha. There has to be a rationale here. The Rosh came in understanding that deleting a letter to put a new one there is fixing a mistake. Is repairing, is fixing the writing. If there's a tishtush, I'm not fixing any writing. I'm just removing the tishtush in order to write. Says the Rosh, a beautiful chiddush, which he spells out. This is what he's saying. I learned from the Tosefta that a wrong letter is no better than tishtush. I am repairing this. You can't make that distinction and say that a miswritten letter is repaired to a correctly written letter, but mess, tishtush, spilt ink removal isn't a repairing of a letter. No, this is also deemed a repairing of a letter. Where's the repairing of the letter? Again, the same idea, the letter that will come, the future letter. Preparing, melechas mechika is preparing and fixing, or an act of fixing, which allows me to put the letter there. Merely removing tishtush, the Rosh thought was not an act of repair. Kamash Malon, that there is an act of repair. The Rosh understands this is also deemed repairing. Is anyone with me in this? Is this? Yeah.
I mean, you started with the Ram saying it's got to be of the same type.
The
tishtush is not of the same.
Correct. The Rosh and the Ran are arguing. There's no way. I don't see a way. I don't know. I don't see a way of resolving the Ran and the Tosefta. As far as I can tell, I don't see a way of resolving it. Unless the Ran would say that if you're deleting letters and it's only Benoni that can fit, where it's not obvious that you're writing another one, you need it. If it's a big ink spill where it's clear by any measure it's two, then that would be sufficient or something around that. I don't know how the Ran would exactly. 1 second, Ravi. I don't know exactly how the Ran would resolve the Rosh, but I'm learning to understand that the Brisa and the Rosh and the Ran are all living in the same universe, meaning they're all playing with the same idea. And in a minute we'll come on to the Biur Halacha. They're all playing with the same idea that Mechika isn't removing information, Mechika isn't preparing paper, Mechika is a fixing malacha, fixing a mistake malacha. And fixing a mistake has to have some of these features, and they're now trying to work out what sort of features it has. Repairing something, it's part of the family of repairing malachas. There's a concept called repairing, which isn't just preparing for the new writing, it's repairing. Repairing contains both these elements in it. So the Ram understood that at least with Ois Godel being translated into two smaller Oisius, it isn't automatically repairing. It's heading towards being a removal and then a new act of writing. There's some continuity for it to be deemed a repair. Because where are the two Oisius? The Brisa suddenly is a beautiful Brisa. The Brisa is being Mechadesh, that the share of two oasis that you need for the malacha, or the chashivas that you need of two oasis for malacha, is in conceptual oasis, in virtual oasis, in as yet non-existent oasis. I haven't yet written the other two oasis. I may not even write them on Shabbos. It may be Motzi Shabbos by the time I write them, or I may actually never get around to writing them in the end. Nonetheless, I've done an act of repair in two oasis. Where are these two oasis? Invisible. They don't yet exist. It's an act of removing one large oasis to create the space to write two smaller oasis is a repair in two oasis. And you sort of ring them to Ramanach Rabbi Yossi. He says this is a chayma of Mochek and Kosef, because Kosef has to take place in two real oasis. Mochek takes place only in two virtual oasis, two as yet non-existent oasis. The chashivas of the one big oasis is the two future small oasis that don't as yet exist. So the Brisa sort of feels a little bit illuminated to me. I'll come to a moment, Rafi. The Prima Godim seems now to be stretching the concept even further. And the Prima Godim is saying that it's very interesting. I'm deleting an IOU. The example I gave of the IOU is I accidentally wrote £2,000 and it's really £200. What happens if I've paid the debt? Was it a mistake when I wrote it? Not at all. What happens if I delete a book that was a perfectly brilliant book, but I now want to use the paper for something else? So in those days, parchment was valuable, so I scrape off the old book and I put a new book there. Is that called fixing a mistake? There was no mistake. But it's still an act of repair or correcting because it no longer accords with reality because I no longer owe the £200 because I've paid off the £200, or it no longer accords with my desires because I don't want any more the old book that was written. Now I want to write something new on the parchment. And this is also included in Mochek. So Mochek is repair or fixing, but not even in the sense of fixing a mistake. It's a repair or fixing in terms of my needs or my wants or the reality. I don't anymore owe £200, or I don't anymore want the writing that's there because I want to take away that book in order to write something else. Now, if I'm just removing a book, that could be makalkel. There's nothing wrong with that book that's there. And that, therefore, you need an almanas lichtov. That's where the repair is happening. But if there's something wrong with the information, because it's inaccurate information, because it's a debt that no longer is owed, not because it was a mistake at the time, but because I paid it, or it's, I don't know, a mistaken scientific theory that's now been disproven, that's a tikkun. That's also a type of repair, because I'm removing information which currently isn't in line with reality, either because it's a mistake or because I no longer own the money. That's also called a repair. That's the chiddush of the Prima Godim. But all the poskim and all the Rishonim are playing with this idea of Mochek not being an act of just preparing paper, Mochek not just being an act of erasing information, but Mochek being an act of tikkun or repair or fixing. And now they're trying to work out what determines or defines the nature of this fixing. Sorry, Rafi, you've been waiting patiently. I apologize.
So I'm just trying to understand that why can't the run when you Mochek two letters?
Yes.
No condition that the new letters we fit into things like space have to be connected to the
Yes. Yeah. I don't know exactly how to answer this, other than that the run seems to be saying there the mechika is the fixing of two letters. But if I want to be fixing two letters that don't exist, they're virtual letters, it can't be yesh me'ayin. It can't be I'm putting something completely new there, a completely different sort of information. The mechika isn't, I came into the sugya assuming either mechika is in the paper, the surface, or mechika is in the letters that exist. There's a third possibility. The concept of repair means the mechika is in the virtual letters that don't yet exist. Mechika is also an act in letters, and that's what I'm hearing. Why I'm hearing in the run a little easier. If there's a real two letters that I'm erasing, then I understand there's a real space for even you. If it's merely one letter where I've got to conceive of the future letters, what am I fixing? Where is my act of fixing? And that's why I'm bringing in the brisa. Where is other two letters in the brisa? What's the answer to the question of its osachas? And Rabbi Yossi says there is a chiddush in this. This isn't obvious. This isn't just a clever word game. That if Mechika is in the paper, there isn't really a chumrah in Mochek over Kosev. Kosev is in two letters, and Mochek is in the space for two letters. There's not really a chumrah of one or the other. The answer is there is a chumrah over here, because if it's melachot in the paper, then it's the space of two letters. The melachot is not in the space. The melachot is in the repair of two letters. I haven't repaired two letters, I've repaired one letter. That's the chiddush of the brisa. That's what I'm hearing in this. I'm trying to tell you an intuition of a Svara Idach Zil Gemara. Sorry, you're waiting, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
Just we're taking this idea that we're accepting the human governance, and why do we not have it? It's not quite clear. Why do we not have this Shiur then of two letters on this scenario? Like, it seems inherent. And if we're saying that two letters not because we're still doing a particular repair, then why do we put it in the first place for the other one?
I don't know. I don't know what the Prima Goddam would say about this. You're right. I don't know. Good try. Yeah.
So if the concept is a repair or a ticker, what is the problem with cutting a cake with lentil speed?
Also difficult. By the way, most of the posts can argue with Ramah, and they say this doesn't make sense even as a drabanon. Again, I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. I've understood better the Gemara and Gittin. I've understood the Yerushalmi. I haven't fully understood the Ramah. The Chiddush of the Ramah, difficult. The Ramah was always a bit of a weak raya because it's a shver Ramah with a drabanon of an extension, so it's hard to know where the drabonons go. The Yerushalmi and the Gemara of Gittin of Sikra were clear eyes because they were derisers, and I think we've understood them better. You haven't cleared any paper, and nonetheless, this is a repair because I've converted my reish to a dalet, or the dalet to the reish and so on. So this has tidied up enough of the sugya that I'm feeling good about this, and please don't ruin my joy. Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't know. This is not complete, but to me, there's profit in this. Yeah.
How do we understand the Rambam now?
Yeah.
Based on this new insight, when he said that if you basically mochek shelon minatek alkel, you're liable. That's what implied. But also he mentioned that if you mochek al minatek top shelkiot, then they will also have a problem. So why does he bring both of these things?
So this is important. I think the Rambam holds like the Prima Godim. That's what it seems to me. The Rambam holds that any avoidance of makalkad is enough. I'm disagreeing with Paul. I think this is a good diuk. I hear there's room to argue. Paul is saying the Rambam at the beginning and throughout says what he wants to say. How dare you argue? The Rambam says Anas Nichtov, and you're saying not. To me, it doesn't look like that. I think the key words in the Rambam are as long as you avoid makalkal, that's enough. My big question was, but there's two worlds going on over here. One is erasing information, and the other is almanas lichtov. How can the Rambam just merge them into one halacha and casually forget to mention that this is just an example? In my world, I understand it because there's one malacha of repair. There's a number of ways of having a tikkun and repair. The standard way of having the tikkun and repair is like the Mishnah. By the way, this is also why I'm convinced this is the better diuk, because the Rambam tries to cut and paste from the language of Chazal as much as possible. So he starts with the malacha with the language of the Mishnah. At the end, he says, but who I don't know, as long as it's not manasa kalkal yochayev. My problem was, I'm going crazy over here because these are two different malachas. One is erasing information and one is preparing paper. In my world, I'm no longer bothered by that anymore. There's one malacha of repairing. The Rambam is saying different scenarios. He starts off with the Mishnah's example of what the repair is, and then he says, as long as it's not makalkel, any other example of repair would be sufficient. Why did the Mishnah give that example? That's anyway a question. That's not my problem in a sense. That's the Prima God's problem. If any repair is enough, any tikkun is enough, why did the Mishnah say al-manas lichtov? Why did it choose that one example? Rabbi Kiva sort of asked that, and Tosfos also. It's the same. This is no longer Zobin's problems. These are a structural question on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Koreh al-manas lichtov is the melacha, and as Rabbi Kiva points out, any other tikkun of Koreh is enough. If you're Koreh b'chamosa, that's also to assuage your anger, that's also enough to be called a tikkun. So for some reason, the Mishnah chose one example of tikkun, but what it really meant was any tikkun. And the Rambam is simply replicating that journey of the Mishnah. But I'm not bothered that in one halacha he's saying two olamas, two worlds, two different types of melacha, two co-obvious melachas, or an ava and a tolda, two definitions of what my isek is, what my action is, what my achievement is. It's one definition of one action of repair, and there's a number of scenarios of how you do it. So that's what's making me happy in the sugya. Yeah.
What at the end, he seems to be saying his main idea in the Hebrew is still much shevet hachitiva. So if it's just repair, why is he
Because with Tishtush,
Yeah.
I think it's still accurate to say that, because with Tishtush, that is the only fixing that's going on. I think that's still accurate. I only rush again. Look, I'm a man who's happy with small profits. To me, this is a small profit in the sugya, but a worthwhile one, which is I understand. It seems to me clearer where the Rishonim are going in the sugya, and it seems to be clearer. We're not dealing with these two koseives that are floating around and haunting us. There's one melachot tikkun, and it's just now. See whether you can work through sources and whether this makes sense to you or not. Rabbi, so you will have homework, and on Sunday I'm also going to be doing this, trying to go through the Rishonim and see if this fits. To me, this fits. That we've avoided these two extremes. Koseiv, there's one koseiv, and the Rishonim are now all arguing about exactly how that plays out and what the parameters are. Okay, I hope that's at least somewhat satisfying. So I wish everyone a good evening. I think this is an important shiur though, because I feel that it was worth fighting the Rishonim until we gave up fighting and actually began listening to them. And it's a lesson in sometimes having to sort of rethink oneself. So